Kia ora koutou, ko John Reid toku ingoa. Welcome to this edition of Water New Zealand's podcast series, Tāwara o Te Wai. I'm John Reid from Water New Zealand. Today we're going to talk about the current landscape of the water sectors in both Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand. So in this podcast, we're hoping to understand a little bit more about the lessons we can learn and share from the Australian water sector as we all navigate the coming years, both with shared challenges and some real opportunities for both of us. As usual, I'm joined by my co-host Hannah Edmond and two fantastic guests. First is Lorraine Kendrick, President of Water New Zealand. And secondly, we've got Peter Dennis, who's President of the Australian Water Association. Kia ora, Hannah, Lorraine and Peter.
Kia ora, John.
Kia ora.
Thanks for joining us. Though there's been lots of change and challenges faced by the New Zealand water industry over the last few years. And personally, I'm really interested in hearing about how the Australian water industries has addressed some of those similar challenges over the last few years as well. But we'll kick off with Hannah. So over to you.
Thanks, John. So over the last few months, we have all seen the coalition government coming into play in New Zealand, and they have changed the previous government's approach to water reform, and it's now called the Local Water Done Well. As the detail of this is still being worked out, we're not specifically going to talk on water reform in the industry today, but we are kind of interested in some of the challenges and learning from elsewhere as we're going through and picking up, especially on what Peter can talk to us about in Australia. So Lorraine, what are some of the challenges that our councils are facing at the moment?
So Hannah, you are correct. I think all of the listeners will be quite aware of the changes that are going on with the local water done well policy. So probably just to give a quick recap for those who don't know. So the New Zealand government has recently announced the process and timeframes to implement the local water done well policy. And in short, what that does is that it ensures that the local councils retain ownership and control of water services. So we have just had recent legislation passed that repealed the previous government's legislations for the water services reform. And now the government is working on introducing two bills. The first bill, which should come in mid-year, is looking at provisions relating to council service delivery plan and transitional economic regulation. It will also bring in streamlined requirements to establish a council-controlled organisation, or a CCO for many of us, and that will enable councils to shift the delivery of water services to a more financially stable configuration. The second bill, which is likely to come in towards the end of the year or the beginning of the following year, it will bring in provisions for a longer term regime, and that's going to focus on financial sustainability. It will bring in a complete economic regulation. There should also be a range of structural and financial tools that the councils could look if they are looking to set up a CCO, and there will also be a regulatory backstop provision. So that's what's being worked on at the moment. So Hannah is right in that we are still trying to seek some clarity on that as we kind of go through, and certainly in Water New Zealand we'll be working closely with the government and the wider organisation to make sure that those bills will be really good and practical on the ground for our water community. So when you kind of think of what's in those bills, that kind of gives you a highlight of what some of the issues that are in that we're dealing with in Water New Zealand. So the first thing for me is always people. If you don't have people, you don't have an industry. And so the key thing for me in regard to people, and that's whether you're in a local council, whether you're in central government, or whether you're in the supply chain. The simple thing is that we are dealing with issues in regard to capability, dealing with issues with capacity, trying to retain staff, and no offense, Peter, but we are trying to stop people kind of jumping the ditch and going over to Australia. But I know you look after them really well when you have them over there. And also kind of about attracting staff. And then once we've got them, making sure that they're properly trained so that they can continue to go on and progress. So look, I think that's a big issue right across New Zealand and right across the water sector, regardless the discipline you're in. Secondly, for me, is funding. And I'm going to tie the people and funding discussion together, because for me, you kind of need smart people, and you need that people and capacity to be able to make the smart decisions. So we need people to make smart decisions on moving forward. And if we have those people making the smart decisions, the legislation will bring in the structures and the tools and configuration for the funding. We are really going to be able to start humming along. The other areas that is real for everyone at the moment is that we are dealing with increased regulation. So we've already got TMUD RY signalling, whilst they didn't necessarily increase the standards of drinking water standards, they're certainly starting to implement them. And they are bringing in wastewater rules, and also they have that oversight for stormwater. And we have the role of the regional councils in that too. So I think increased regulation, both drinking water and environment, is going to be key. We've already talked about that the second bill will bring in longer term provisions for an economic regulator. So that's going to be interesting. And then you've got the basics. Managing your assets, replacing your assets when you should be replacing them. So good asset management, knowing what you have and knowing what to do with it. Then we've got growth. And then we've got expectations of level of service. What does your community actually want? So set aside the mandatory things that you have to do from compliance, but what does your community want? And every community may want something different. And then finally, climate change and natural hazards.
Yeah, Peter, so what from that sort of set of huge challenges that sort of rings true for you, or what are there any lessons that you've seen that we can apply here?
Well, I think there's lots of lessons because we've tried a lot of different things. I think if you look at how water's structured in Australia, you've got several different models from Western Australia and South Australia that sort of are state-owned corporations that look after the whole state, and big cross subsidies between sort of the cities and regional remote areas, to your state-owned corporations in Victoria, which have worked really well. They sort of bit the bullet early and reformed state-owned corporations in New South Wales, being Sydney Water and Hunter. But I think what I drew out of what Lorraine said, I think the challenge we face in our regional areas, which is regional New South Wales and regional Queensland, it's a real struggling model, and there's lots of parallels between New Zealand and those regional areas where there's a underinvestment in infrastructure, a real lack of skills and resources, and then you've got the added issue of water resilience, which we're really just starting to learn how far off the mark we are there. And so you've got quite a polarised level of service between some of those more Victoria and those bigger state-owned corporations in southeast Queensland, New South Wales, and that are performing well. But I think the fundamental opportunity is very similar to what Lorraine talked about. First of all, getting the people moving away and getting increased scale and local government ownership and skills-based board. And the Southeast Queensland model is a really good example of where that's gone really well. They've gone down a local government ownership model, got scale and skills-based board, and that's really made a huge difference over the last 10 or 15 years. Taswater, it's been going down a different model as well, a state-owned corporation. It's taken them about, they're really just starting to get through some of the issues, but these journeys are 10 to 15 years. They're not 5 years, because there's just such a massive catch up on people, skills and resources, and on infrastructure. It's an incredibly challenging time in the Australian water industry. There's a massive capital deployment, and on top of that, you've got the whole decarbonisation journey as well.
I'd be really interested in hearing a little bit more about the sort of the skills and the shortages. I mean, Lorraine can talk to the, from the operators, the problems that we have there with people, leaving, or the age of those people and retiring out of the industry. We see the young people in our industry wanting to go and get different experiences away from New Zealand. Often in Europe or Australia, we will struggle retaining people as we go through this period of change as well. So what sort of skills and people issues do you see in the Australian industry? Is that similar? Is that just normal, or is that something that's a bit unique to us?
No, I think I think it's one of our priority issues. WASA and AWA are working together across that. I think what we're seeing is utilities that are used to people working there for 20 years plus. That's not happening anymore. People are coming in, staying 4 or 5 years, getting some experience and moving on. So utilities really need to reinvent their people strategy. And then you've got the whole regional issue where your regional councils train up their operators, they get trained, and then there's a real attraction towards the coast. Why wouldn't you want to go and work at Byron Bay or Coffs Harbour or somewhere like that? So there's a real drain of skills away from some of those inland regional centres to coastal areas. And I think on top of that, you just got this massive capital investment that requires people. And you know, John, my biggest challenge for the water industry, both in New Zealand and Australia, is better planning. And planning requires some really specialised skill sets because we've got to be able to consistently make the right decisions around where we allocate capital, and then when we choose those projects, we need to de-risk them, sort of take them through the stakeholder consultation process, which is far more complicated than it was 5 or 10 years ago. And then the whole decarbonisation element of all this as well. So I think there's a real shortage of some of those real specialist skills that are really needed to take us where we want to go.
So I guess with both of you, we've talked about almost a mirror of challenges across over the Tasman Sea. What I'm interested in on top of that then is, how do we support our councils in overcoming these? Peter, you've talked there about the fact that, you know, we need to be doing better planning for it. We also need to be reinventing people's strategies within how we retain people, or also how we're flexible to the fact that we know people are going to be moving, and people are doing that much more frequently. But how do you both think we can be supporting councils in overcoming those challenges? Lorraine?
Well, I think it's really just understanding what you've got at the moment. You know, John highlighted our average age, I think when we last did our study, which was a few years ago, was 56 in the water industry. So I mean, so if they're 56, say we add 3 years to 59 now. So and as you say, it's all that knowledge, and then the difficulty of sharing that knowledge back, and the younger generation not necessarily wanting to stay in one place, you know, for a big bulk of their duration. What I think is interesting in the water sector in New Zealand, and we did look at it a few years ago, is that we do have, at that younger age, 35 below, our diversity is quite good. Even if I just denied diversity is not just simply gender, but if I took that as an example, we do have, you know, around about 50% is females coming in. And I think that's probably an element that the water sector is no longer an engineer. And I think that's the change. So it's not a male dominated engineer. We've got some amazing young women coming in from the sciences, coming in from the environmental, coming in from the planning. And so I think there's an element of branding that actually water is not about, you know, engineers sitting in the corner with their suits on. It actually is quite diverse. And particularly if you start bringing in some of the cultural elements that we're really lucky to have in New Zealand, and you consider Te Mano Te Wai, and how does that reflect, and how does that change your focus? And you're not talking about a concrete pipe solution anymore. You were talking about a environmental solution, whether it be a wetlands, which then has a playground, which has an amenity value. So all of a sudden you start diversifying and you know, a career in water means so many things now. And I think as a sector, that's what we need to do. We need to rebrand ourselves out of that, you know, probably older legacy thing, and actually state that actually it's an amazing place, and it's an amazing place where you're young, and thereby you can join it. And so when they want to kind of leave at that 4 or 5 years, you can still stay in the water sector, but go and do something different in it. And I think it's trying to map those career pathways will be useful, but it's also trying to utilize the skills and the knowledge of our older employees and getting them working with the younger employees to kind of get that retention and traction and coming through and having that focus. I mean, I know certainly for me, coming in when I was a younger female coming into New Zealand, it was just older men, and they, you know, there wasn't probably an element of a father figure mentoring, but you know, they were great, absolutely fantastic and great to work for. So it's trying to keep everything in the mix and kind of keep all the balls kind of up in the air, and then start mapping different pathways than our traditional route.
And I think that maps really interestingly against the conversations around zero carbon and the new people coming in, the younger generations that are coming in being so passionate about that, but also the more experienced in our sector are actually supporting, and they've also got lots of fantastic ideas, having seen things over the years. So that collaboration between the different generations, it faces up to the challenge in a lot of these different spaces, doesn't it? Peter, did you have anything else to add?
Yeah, couldn't agree more with Lorraine. And as a 56-year-old, it's nice to see I'm average and not above average. But couldn't agree. I think it is the diversification. You look at the extensive stakeholder engagement we've got to do on projects, the decarbonisation, and AWA and WASA are working very much on the STEM programs in schools and all that to really encourage a much broader group of people coming through, and the communications and taking community on the journey is really important with things like purified recycled water and things like that. So those broader skill sets are really important, and I think there is a bit of a time element to it. We do have those people who've been around a long time, and they've got so much knowledge transfer to give, and I think knowledge management's a really important area and thinking about that.
So the water industry's got this wider role to play that we've been talking about, so supporting working with our communities. And there's also what's been great in the New Zealand water industry is this sort of absorbing or taking account of the cultural values over the last few years. So how's this approach to culture and Indigenous people really changed the water industry? I'll give that to Peter first, because it'd be really interesting for our New Zealand listeners to hear about that.
So we've been doing sort of water planning here in the Hunter, and we had a big new dam that was going to be built at Tilligra, and didn't go ahead. So we started thinking about, well, we really need to understand water resilience better, and we looked at all the paleoclimate work that was going on, and so looking at ice cores, corals, trees, and the speleer work out of caves, looking at, and all those data sets correlated. We're looking at the last 2,000 years, and what we found was that last 2,000 years was a lot drier and a lot more climate variability than the data on record the last 150 years or so. So we're factoring all that paleoclimate into our decision making. But there was a drought in 1174 that was 39 years long in New South Wales, 39 years long. And our Indigenous people have lived through that. They haven't been here 2,000, they've been here 60,000 years. So what can we learn off them in terms of how they managed water and land? And they were the best managers of, the land was part of them, and how they lived was embedded in their songlines and storylines and how they lived. And they were unbelievable custodians and stewards of land and water. So there's so much we can learn off them in how we manage water in the Australian landscape. And I think that goes for all First Nations people.
Lorraine, any parallels with what we experience here in New Zealand?
Well, I suppose I just kind of want to, I suppose, acknowledge the work that the wider water community have done when we developed as a community the towards 2050, which is our transformation vision for the water sector in New Zealand. And really, at the heart of that, and I mentioned it earlier, is the Te Mano Te Wai concept, and it refers to the fundamental importance it actually plays in waters. And when I talk about waters, I mean the one water, so all three waters. It's kind of connected through. And what Te Mano Te Wai does, it it prioritizes the health of the water, which in turn, if you prioritize the health of the water, then you ultimately have your human health outcomes are better, your community outcomes are better, your social outcomes are better, your economic outcomes are better, and you're meeting your cultural needs, of your community. And so I think that is, I think we're on a journey with that. I think, and we're still learning what does that mean, and it's quite community specific. So you can't really take a broad brush across the country and say this is what it means. Each community will have different outcomes associated with it. So I think that's going to be really fundamental as we kind of work through that journey and see how that plays out. And the other area that pops up actually with Te Mano Te Wai, it actually makes you think as a catchment as a whole, not just the pipe and the utility. And the area key for me, and it's an area that we don't talk about that much, is the 1 million New Zealanders that don't have access to potable water supply or sanitary services. So they're working on either a water tank or a septic tank. And they are some of our more poorer communities and Māori Pacific communities predominantly across the country. So I think there's a conversation to be had, and leaning into Te Mano Te Wai or the cultural aspects enables that conversation to probably happen in a more comfortable way.
I mean, this whole conversation started off talking about the challenges in the water industry, and both in Australia and New Zealand, and it started to feel a bit like we were being bogged down by lots of big challenges. But actually, as we've gone on, I think there's some amazing opportunities that are coming up through the diversity that we're talking about, through engaging with our Indigenous people and and their cultures, and looking at how they can apply, and also engaging with our communities as a whole to see how we can apply. What I'm kind of excited about is to hear from both of you what you're looking forward to over the next few years. Maybe Lorraine, can you start us off?
Probably got three key things, but probably one of the first thing is through the conversations that we've had through the discussion on the water reform and now the local water done well policy. I think across the country we have definitely lifted the awareness of the water and what it means, what state it's in, where it's good, where it's potentially not so good, where are we sitting from the regulatory perspective. And so that is now out in the community, probably more so than what it's ever been before. And to me, I think that's a real positive, because if you don't have water literacy, it's hard to make any gains. The other bit, again, I'll be going back to the people, because and for those who work in the water sector, this is no surprise to you. I think we've got the most engaged, passionate people ever. They all love their jobs. They all enjoy their jobs. They all support each other. And that's purely because I think New Zealand is a small nation, and probably the 2 degrees of separation, I'm not sure, but the water sector is even smaller. So it is an absolutely delightful industry to work in. And really, it's those, it's our people. They know what is best for their community, and now and into the future. And I think, again, it's just making sure we listen to them, and we bring everybody on the journey with us. And I think kind of the third thing is, we are still working our way through reform and what that means, and getting some clarity on that as we kind of embark on the legislation that's going to be brought through the remainder of this year and potentially into early next year. So certainly from my perspective and President of Water New Zealand, we have a responsibility to support our members through that, support the wider water community through that, and continue to work with the government, both at a central and local level, to really assist in the implementation of the local water done well policy, because ultimately, if it's done well, everyone will benefit.
Peter, How can you compete with those amazing opportunities?
I can't, but I'll give it a go. Well, it's a decade of water, and what a fun place to be at the moment. I've never seen such a crucible of like different opportunities. And I think for the water sector, both across Australia and New Zealand, I think as we embark on decarbonisation, it's just a massive generational capital deployment which is a massive investment. And I think the opportunity for the water sector is to really lead that. We're one of the few sectors that connects everything together. We connect food, we connect energy, we connect our cities, and water's just that lifeblood that flows through our cities. So what is the place to be? And I think that's that opportunity to attract people into the sector with that sort of backdrop of what we have to achieve.
I love the decade of water. I love the fact that our industry is so exciting to be in, and I'm hoping that our listeners will take some of the energy and enthusiasm from that today. Thank you, Peter and Lorraine, for joining Hannah and myself today. It's fantastic to hear that conversation and be part of it. This concludes our first podcast of 2024. We'll be back next month with a discussion on managing water shortages from both local Aotearoa and international UK perspectives. Thank you.